Welcome back to the Religious Treehouse. I'm Jodie.
And I'm Matthew.
How are you today, Matthew?
I am doing good. I don't know if it's a little cold or just allergies or something, but other than that, I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
Probably very similar, full of phlegm. 'Tis the season to be
Yeah.
phlegmy. And now would be the perfect opportunity for an advertisement. Someone get one our way for allergy
Yeah.
medication. Um,
Allergies. Here, I'll right here.
there we go.
Allergy medication. Please fund us.
Someone. But today's episode is going to be a little bit different tone-wise than normal. We are talking about a very serious topic. Matthew, what topic are we talking about?
Oh, yeah. So we're doing our movie episode. We're looking at a documentary and we're looking at PBS's Frontlines, Faith and Doubt at Ground Zero. So this is a 9/11 documentary. So, you know, sensitive topic for sure. But in the, as if you follow along with us, you know that every other week we do a movie and every other week we do like a religious studies topic, and we're going to start a series on religious violence. And I think one of the best ways to kind of start this conversation of religious violence is to kind of look at the most famous act of religious violence that we, especially as Americans, are aware of and have some connection to. Like there's tons of religious violence out there, but this one, if you think of like an act of religious violence, odds are you probably think of 9/11. So I think in order to preface that conversation that we're going to have, I think the best way to do that is to start with this documentary. I really think this documentary is a good way to kind of like look at how faith and violence and extremism and the impacts of that kind of affect people. So that's kind of why I chose for us to listen to this one or watch this one. I didn't realize how few people saw this until like after I watched it for this. Like Letterboxd has like 18 or 19 views, which is, real sad. But it's a great documentary. It's on PBS for free, so like y'all can watch it. Um, but yeah, that's kind of, the preface, I guess. What were your initial thoughts?
It was a very humbling documentary, I felt, to watch for these people to be so vulnerable about their struggle with their faith, whether that be with finding faith, losing faith.
Hmm.
We got to see both sides of the spectrum, and we got to hear from multiple religious leaders about
Hmm.
their own struggles with faith after witnessing the event and helping
Right.
people grieve and mourn. I just don't really know where to start.
Yeah, I think the scholar in me really likes to analyze these things and like, oh, let's like dive into the analysis of it. But I think one thing that we should focus on is like the grief that was expressed here. This was filmed or released like less than a year after the attacks, and obviously filmed before that and prepared. So like the people in this are still very very actively dealing with the grief and of the of 9/11. So looking at that through that lens of like, okay, this is in some sense perhaps healing and able for them to like talk about it, but also the academic in me wants to like look at it and say, okay, how are they expressing this grief, and how is like their interpretation of these events impacting how religion is expressed and thought of and imagined in modern senses now, and how this has vastly impacted our view not only on Islam, which has been blamed for this, but also just religion in general. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think categorizing this as and understanding this as a film centered in grief, I think is also very important for the start of this conversation.
definitely. This topic is also just like a really hard topic
Hmm.
that I'm I feel I'm struggling to talk about because you don't remember the towers falling. You were a year
Yeah, I was
old.
in preschool.
Yeah. So like you were really young. Um,
Mm,
so watching the towers fall and being cognizant of that and the shift that happened,
mm,
like it rocked the entire country.
mm,
But so often I feel like people reflect mostly on their experience, how it affected them, and putting these people who are so very directly affected and their voices, and seeing and hearing these stories probably that have been mentioned anytime over the memorials the last 24
Yeah.
years. You know, we've probably heard them, but seeing them again in this day and age was very I don't know how to quite describe. I felt very shaken, and I tried to put myself in their shoes.
Mm,
Like, how would you react? One of the first things they talk about are the people jumping out of buildings
right.
and grabbing hands with strangers,
Mm,
and just what in those last moments could they have seen someone pose that maybe something, there was a switch in their bodies and they saw a heaven that they were jumping into.
yeah. Yeah. One of the people they interview like tries to imagine like how someone could have that much courage in order to do that, like in that situation. And he comes to the conclusion like the only way that they could do that is if they had some deep faith in something, and that they were jumping into something beautiful, a heaven of some sort, a garden, a Eden type situation, which I think is a beautiful way to kind of rationalize what's happening. Um, but it's what how do people act in these extreme situations? It's just terrifying.
Yeah, it was. And then there was also on the other end of it this feeling of oneness that people felt, that the people that were on the ground who were watching firefighters go into the building,
Mm,
or helping people who managed to get out, like it, these barriers that normally we have as a society just kind of stripped and fell away,
mm,
and everyone was there for each other, which was a very beautiful thing to see. But to think about the extreme act it took to
mm.
get there is very terrifying.
Yeah, and I think one thing that this documentary also kind of hinted at, not as much as I think I would have liked, is that there was this sense of unity. There was this sense of oneness that came about, and that is something that's very much highlighted in modern conversations about it, and as you know, for the past 20-25 years. But also, there is this sense of disunity where there's this unity for particularly white Christian Americans or people that fall into that demographic, but a separation from you know Islamic Americans, Sikh Americans, people that don't fit the mold of someone that they think is safe now that this idea of the Islamic terrorist overpowers the mind. So there's that sense of oneness for a large percentage of America. There's also that sense of distancing between some forms of Americans that aren't deemed safe anymore because of this.
Yeah, they were very careful in their language, especially the religious leaders talking about this, about
Mm,
extremes and stuff. But we did get that one story about all of these religious leaders who got together to pray.
mm.
And he was a priest or just a pastor,
I
but
think
he
he was
got in trouble.
Episcopalian. I could be
He was,
wrong. I think he was Episcopalian.
he was Episcopalian, but he got in trouble for being on
Mm.
stage with people of different faiths.
Right.
And that, I mean, looking back at that, I'm not shocked. I remember what
Mm.
temperaments were like. I'm
Yeah.
not shocked, but it was disheartening to see.
Yeah. Because like on the one hand, they're experiencing this immense grief still, and
Mm.
people handle that grief in various ways. And I don't think I'm in a place to say how people should or should not grieve. Um, and so like acknowledging that that is how it happened and that is how maybe it had to happen for those people, I think is perhaps valid. But the outpouring of Islamophobia that came from this, as seeing that these terrorists as an expression of all of Islam, was very harmful. And because of that, there were those people that I think was there beforehand, before 9/11, of like you can't have this interfaith dialogue and you can't have a pastor from Christians. You can't have a pastor speak with a rabbi, with an imam, with religious leaders that aren't Christian, because that dilutes the faith. That seems to imply that all the gods are equal. and you can't have that for Christians, and that's seen as bad. But I think the fact that this was religious extremism, religious terrorism, heightened that, in which it made it even more difficult to see any form of unity between Christians and other religions. So if this were, I don't know, some other, if this were North Korea, that is not like centrally religious of any sorts, that did this act, I don't think there would have been as much of an outpouring against that priest for praying with all these people. But because there was these heightened religious tensions that just came because of this, that I think has hurt interfaith relationships immediately following, and I think that still ripples into today.
Definitely, because there are people who remember, and they say
Yeah.
never forget. And
Mm-hmm.
attached and tied to that for a lot of people is that feeling
Mm-hmm.
of hostility.
Yeah. And I think, but I think, kind of somewhat moving on in the
Yeah.
conversation, I think the other thing that this documentary did well was acknowledging that it's still Islam. Like a lot of people who try to distance the extremism from Islam in good faith try to, well, sometimes say that, like, oh, that's not real Islam, and I don't think that's helpful. I think acknowledging, as I think one of the rabbis did well, acknowledging that is still Islam, just as Christian extremism, the Crusades, the KKK, that is still Christianity. It's bad and wrong, but it's still Christianity. And Baruch Goldstein and Jewish extremists, like that is, they're still Jewish, but that's not, it doesn't distinguish them from Judaism or Christianity or Islam. They're still part of the faith. And to be part of that faith, you have to wrestle with the extremists in your group as well. You can't just
Yeah.
say, no, 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 that's not an actual part of my group. And I think that's hard for people to wrestle with. I think it's, you see this, we talk about Christianity a lot because we know that, the most. And even when people aren't extremists, it's really hard for Christians, for people of any faith, to look at people that practice their faith differently than their own and acknowledge that they're still part of their faith. Like a lot of evangelicals look at Latter-day Saints or Jehovah's Witnesses or even Catholics and say, no, 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 they're not actually Christians. And it's the same thing happening here. And we have to be very much aware of that. Yes, they are still Christians. They are still Muslims. They are still Jews, even if they don't practice it the same way I do.
Yeah. And I think the rabbi also said what would help is everyone recognizing the blood on their hands, not
Mm,
pointing out whose hands are bloodier,
mm,
but recognizing we all have blood on our hands,
right.
religious wise, and figuring out how do we tackle that? How do we monitor that within our religion?
Yeah.
Take accountability and not just the finger pointing. This is the worst. The othering that happened, and it still continues to happen,
Mm,
like especially like you said with Latter-day Saints and Christians. There is a feeling of hostility that I've seen from a lot of evangelical Christians towards Mormons.
mm.
And they get the label of cult, brainwashed, and that's not good.
Yeah. No,
It's
not good at all.
it's not productive. It's not going to get us anywhere. It's not going to get anyone to a place of healing. Eh,
Mm,
but it also feels so difficult to look at Christians and say you need to view Islam. I don't know why it feels so difficult. Maybe it's just because growing up in the church, there was a lot of Islamophobia.
right.
Um,
And I don't think that was, exclusive to the church. I think that was exclusive, not exclusive, but I think that was, a part of America who is often very much intertwined with the church, of course, in the early 2000s, as is today. Um, but yeah, the rise of Islamophobia in America for sure, um, is highly relevant to 9/11. And I think it should also be noted, if I remember, this could be wrong. Like this is something I heard from like an undergraduate class that I took a few years ago. a few years ago, that like the level of anti-Islamic sentiments is similar, like percentage wise, that people like felt negatively towards Islam is similar to like the anti, Mormon sentiments that we have today. So like, and like obviously that skyrocketed after 9/11, but for a singular event like that put forth by an extremist group to completely alter the way that a society thinks of a group of people can change just like that. And any group that has any semblance of minority or otherness can jump into disproportionate prejudice against them at any second. And that is something that we can learn from this horrific situation as well. Like, how do we as Americans, as people of the world, how do we react to this tragedy, and how do we group people into the way that we think based on past experience?
Yeah. What else stood out to you from the documentary?
Um, I mean, we touched on this. I think how people were handling their grief was very interesting. We saw the one lady, I think she was like a police officer whose daughter died. Um, and that night she like saw a light that was like an angel saying that her daughter was okay, up in heaven. And then you have other people. I think there's an Irish Catholic woman who like lost her faith essentially, and then another man said, "Oh, I have no more respect for God. Like I respect Jesus, I respect the Holy Spirit, but that God guy, I can have none of him anymore." So like how people rationalize this with their religious beliefs beforehand, and then there were others that said that like they weren't very Christian before, but then they started going to church because of this. So like these pivotal moments, I think it's interesting how it goes both ways. Like, how do you deal with your grief? Do you and it seems to me like the way that people deal with their grief is they come to the conclusion that the way things were can't be the way that things are, and there's some sort of change that happens that helps them rationalize what is happening to them. And that either goes from like having more faith to less faith or having less faith to more faith. A lot of the time, this isn't, across the board or anything, but, kind of following that trend, it was a pretty consistent trend throughout the people that they interviewed, I felt like.
Yeah. They were very eloquent. I feel more so than I could be within the wake of these tragedies talking about their faith. They're
Mm-hmm.
the ones who were more concrete. I felt like I could feel
Mm-hmm.
their resolve. They were
Yeah.
like, yeah, this is it. Whereas you could really feel for the people who had lost their faith, like the struggle with it.
Mm-hmm.
It This documentary I felt very well captured these people's
Yeah.
emotions as they were talking.
Mm-hmm. And then, the other ways that people like rationalized what was happening.
Mhm.
The way that I think one man who had three sons um, in the towers, one of them died, but two others got out. And the way he rationalized it was, well, it could have been much worse. Like my son died, and that's awful, and we can't like it's impossible to live with. But it could have been so much worse, and that's how he rationalized it with his religion. And then a Muslim family whose daughter and her husband, they were praying either let both of them make it out or let neither of them make it out so that they could go to Allah together. Um, which it's how people like rationalize this immense grief is on the one hand like what religion is kind of like really good at. Like that's one of the things that religion is really helpful for, is to deal with these life-changing moments that don't make sense, that you look at the terror in this and you say this does not make sense, like none of this is reconcilable with how I see the world, with how I make sense of things. So religion provides an outlook for that, to put some grief into, to make sense of the world and push it off on some divine being, and like be help you be able to live with that somehow. So I think that's one thing that we definitely saw highlighted in the film. On the other hand, you have to now live with that deity that allowed those things to happen. And that can also provide a lot of tension. And that is what is causing so much of the crises of faith happening in these lives.
Yeah. It's an intense thing to think, and it's an intense thing to think about and to have the feelings about. It's just a lot. I don't have many eloquent words for this. I gotta be honest here.
Yeah.
It just sucked. Like,
Yeah. No, accurate. What were your thoughts on the conversation of evil? They have the section of on the word evil. What were you thinking about that?
oh my, do I have many thoughts about that? So the
Yeah.
conversation surrounding evil, I'm I feel very strongly that I agree with defining something as evil, giving it the label of evil, and not just saying evil individuals or an evil act, but labeling
Mm,
something as evil. It's so harmful. It's so dangerous.
mm,
And the way they would talk, they were talking about what evil looks like. Oh my gosh, when we got to the Holocaust survivor
mm,
and her relaying the evil she has seen
mm,
and the way people treat each other. In my mind, I was kind of like the definition of evil really depends on which side of the situation
yeah.
you're on.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because they mentioned like for for Americans,
Hmm.
this was seen as an evil event. Like I would be I think I would be hard pressed to find someone from America, but from the world, really, except for the small amount of extremists out there that would not see this as evil. But from the perspective of the radical extremists that carried out this, they were seen as martyrs. Like this was not evil. This was an act of like them doing what they thought was genuinely right, and that's where the extremism and fundamentalism comes in. But yeah, this is it depends on your perspective, and I think because the vast majority of the world sees this as evil, like I feel comfortable calling this event as evil because I think most people would. That could be wrong.
And it seems like they were saying it also made people use the word evil more,
Mm,
like with the way the definition of evil changed. And it kind of messes with my brain because I think about you and I. We have now grown up in a world where the word evil has been thrown around
yeah.
so much and has been prescribed to so many things. And I
Hmm.
wonder what the world was like before that.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, they looked at Putin,
Mhm.
who what event was he talking about? Reagan, where Reagan was probably the Berlin Wall, where Reagan described it as evil, and Putin said, "Oh no, no, that was metaphorical language." But then when Putin responded to Bush's remarks about this, he said, "No, that was not harsh enough language to describe what happened there." So no, I definitely definitely feels like the language of evil has been ratcheted up for sure. Um, and in doing that, as we've mentioned before, it dehumanizes people. It stops people from seeing the world in grays and forces people to see it in black and whites.
Yeah.
Um, and and yeah, I'd be very interested to understand how. To me, like my hypothesis that I've got no evidence for, but my hypothesis says that if this didn't happen in America, there would be a lot more middle ground for everything. But because this has been marketed and thought of as the purest of pure evils, it's a lot harder for people to see middle grounds on anything. Completely unrelated to this.
Yeah.
Like it just put into people the idea that it shook everyone's worldview and said, this is not how things can be. There must be things that are truly bad out there. And thinking of things binarily instead of on a spectrum makes things a whole lot easier. Makes things a whole lot easier to comprehend, and kind of strengthens against other world shattering events happening. Because if you live in that in between, it's a whole lot easier to be shattered than if you live on one of the edges.
Yeah. Definitely took the world from that gray to a black and white for a lot of people.
Yeah,
But at what cost?
right.
Because now we have hostility with people that you haven't even had a conversation with. I mean, there's this wall around American evangelicalism where even learning about
Hmm.
Muslims or Islam is
Yeah.
like a no because that's an evil you shouldn't touch. And we don't
Hmm.
do evil. And that's an evil because of this
Yeah.
act. So,
And
how
and
do we
if you
bridge that
can
divide?
and if you can market something as evil, then there's no reason to look into it more. Like that's
No,
just evil. We don't need to understand anything else about it. It's just evil. We're bada bing, bada boom, we're done. So yeah, like this is one of the reasons why like I wanted to study religion because I want to be able to disseminate information to educate people to understand the way that other people see the world. And I think this is like one of the main reasons why. It's because so many people have been I don't like the language of this, but programmed into seeing the world in these ways. Like religion, you look at Islam and they say that's pure evil, but like no, you just don't. That's like perhaps the extremists. Like if we want to look at like the vast edge cases, like sure maybe we can make that argument, but it's so hard to snap people out of that and you know live in wonder. That's it. That's it. This is we'll come back to Valarie Kaur later. But one thing that Valarie Kaur, who's a Sikh activist, um, kind of puts forth in one of her books is that like the fear and hatred that we have kind of pushes away wonder, and in order to have wonder to you know create wonder in the world is a way to kind of like live out your grief, to be better, to heal, to see the goodness. And the squashing of wonder is what's doing a lot of harm. Um, and I think because we see things in such black and whites here, we've kind of squashed out that wonder.
definitely agree. I mean, people don't have conversations the way I thought they would when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
A personal story time when I was 5, this was shortly after the towers fell. I had a Muslim friend, and she and I sat down one day at lunch and we had a conversation, me about Christianity, her about Islam, in the way 5 and 6 year olds can, because it was in
Sure.
very simple terms. But I didn't know, like in my brain later when I thought about it, I was like, oh, I shouldn't have had that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But there was just this pureness in our conversation,
Yeah.
and then that was lost.
Right.
That was taken away. That was, I was told, don't do that. You're going to get brainwashed. You're going to get indoctrinated. The devil's going to take you.
Sure.
And it was, sorry, just thinking about wonder made me remember that,
Yeah.
it was a very good conversation. It opened my eyes. It's what led me here
Mm-hmm.
partially because it just people don't talk because religion's become one of those things that you can't.
Yeah. It's a taboo topic a lot of times.
Yeah, you can't talk about it. And I get very frustrated because I'm like, why couldn't they just label extremist as evil?
Yeah.
Why did the narrative have to be Islam as evil?
Mm-hmm.
It didn't have to be.
Right. Right. It's a lot. I think it's a lot easier for people to to compartmentalize, like because it's a largely unknown. It's if we were this could be a bad metaphor. I don't know if I'm going to stand by it by the end of this sentence. So
Mm,
forgive me if this is wrong, but
okay.
it's as if we're invaded by aliens,
Mm,
and these aliens tell us the way things are, and they
mm,
they say this is how the universe works. This is how Jupiter runs, and we say, okay, this is how Jupiter is, and this is our understanding of it, and they leave, and then we don't talk to them for 40 years, and we say, this is what aliens are, this is what Jupiter believes, and we have this idea of aliens from Jupiter, but because we only talked to them for like 20 minutes 40 years ago, we don't really know what's going on. So we create this idea of what they are. We create this alien from Jupiter because we met them for 20 minutes 40 years ago. And then alien from Saturn comes and does something really messed up that we really hate, and then we're like, oh, this is what all aliens are now. You're like, no, that's not right. This alien from Jupiter was like super nice to us. We just don't really remember, and we didn't like take the time to like learn about what they are. So yeah, I don't know if that metaphor stands up, but that's what my brain went to right away.
I'm not going to say that's the worst one,
Yeah,
or
I've had worse.
I think that was a pretty good one because where are the conversations? We need to have conversations. We need to talk. The,
Right.
the conversation should have been had afterwards, but a
Mm.
rift was made, a division cemented,
Mm.
and now we are where we are now, which I don't know if you guys know, Islamophobia is still very
Mm.
hot in America.
Right. And it's not that there weren't conversations. It's not that there aren't conversations now. It's that it's really hard to get people to want to listen to them. And I think that is as we mentioned, one of the reasons why I want to do this project that we're working on. It's I want to figure out how to get people to listen to these conversations, and and that's fundamentally what I want to do. Like I don't I would love to change people's minds and stuff like that, but that's not my goal. My goal is to get people to listen and understand why they believe what they believe, why they do what they do. And the step one of doing that, the only step of doing that essentially is getting people to listen. And in the wake of 9/11, I think that's very, very important.
Yeah, which we may
Um,
be labeled evil for wanting people to question things and dynamics, and but
sure. But yeah, I think one thing that I wish this documentary touched on but didn't was how people reacted in the wake of 9/11, because religious violence against Muslims, against Sikhs, against a lot of other minority groups like rose like dramatically after 9/11. And this is talking about Valarie Kaur again. Um, like because like the Sikh violence that happened, the violence that happened against Sikhs was astronomically increasing after 9/11, and Sikhs were just killed recklessly in gas stations in Arizona and all over the country in response to 9/11. So I really wish this documentary would have touched on the response to the violence responding to the violence, because that is also something very, very important. And it does get touched on, but not nearly enough as it should. So like there's just so much going on that should be thought of and considered in these very difficult conversations that I just wish there would be more listening and learning going on.
and we will strive to make that happen one episode at a time. Is
Ooh,
there anything else we would like to touch on?
I think we got. This is one of our weirdest movie reviews. Like we kind of talked about the whole documentary. It was a great documentary. Faith and Doubt at Ground Zero, a PBS Frontline. It's free. You can watch it online. So I definitely recommend watching it. Especially if you listen to especially if you're listening to this in like 2 years and you're like, oh, we're going to listen to all of the religious violence episodes that are hopefully soon to come out by us. Um, like let's watch this movie first. Like it's a good framework to like kind of help you like get into the mindset of what's going on for sure.
Well, that has been an episode of the Religious Treehouse. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Bluesky, not on Twitter. Thinking. Nope,
We're
that's
on
about
we're
it.
on the social medias. Find us on the
We're on the
socials.
socials. You can email
Yeah.
us. Let us know something we should have touched on that was in the movie. Um, but thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next
Yeah.
week.
Bye.
Bye.